children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before them all these words, which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. Now, one quick little thing. The people who translated this inserted some words, but that's to keep the meaning. They inserted the words with an arrow, because the actual word said he'll be shot. But knowing the modern culture and how ignorant we all are of ancient history, they realized that if they simply said they'll be shot, we're thinking, but they didn't have guns back then. Back then, when they said they'll be shot, the only thing you shot was an arrow. So the translator just stuck that in there so we would know what they're going on. I'll deal later on with why they're going to do that. But you'll notice in this little passage that there's a repetition of a number. Did anybody recall a number that shows up a couple of times? 3. The number 3 seems to be very significant. Have you noticed? Jesus was dead for 3 years. He ministered for 3 days. He ministered for 3 years. There's 3 days for this and 3 days for that. And the number 3 seems to be very important. There are 3 archangels and so forth and so on. Now, those of us who are Christian believe that this is God continuing to point out the truth of the Trinity. But whatever, he makes it very plain that 3 days exactly, and 3 months exactly. And then they're told to prepare for 3 days. But now I witnessed this. There's something rather interesting. They made this move obviously because the cloud lifted and moved over, and they found a new spot. And then it says this, that God told them, see how I carried them on the eagle's wings. Now just think for a minute. I have never witnessed this. I didn't really look it up, but I have read that eagles will actually let their young ones climb onto their backs and hold on with their talons, hold their backs, and they'll fly off. The only bird capable of doing that. And you think about this, most birds, when they're trying to get their little ones to fly, what do? We use the expression, we push them out of the nest. We talk about people who have to push their kids out of the nest, the empty nesters. Try to get them out on their own, and as soon as a bird does that, there's probably some cat just waiting down there saying, it's going to be time, lunch is on its way. Eagles don't have to worry about that. You have that young eaglet riding on top of its parent's back, and that eagle just soars above everything. what creature, what predator is possibly going to do it harm? So from God's perspective, He has taken the nation of Israel out, and they're under His protection. No one can do them harm. That's how He sees it. But there is a different other perspective. What do you think the folks on the ground, boots on the ground, were thinking? They're thinking, wait a minute, this didn't seem so easy. We have to trudge and walk through this wilderness. We have to go every morning and collect manna. They forgot that that's all they had to do. We have to do this. We have to go and get water. We have to make places for ourselves outside the camp for the other part of human activity that nobody likes to talk about, and so it's not so easy. And we've had moments where we were hungry, and we had moments when we were thirsty, and then we had to fight the Amalekites, and, what do you mean? And what this highlights is this, that so often, from our perspective, it seems like this is a difficult thing, and we have all this stuff we've got to work through, and all these uncertainties and fears and all the rest, and God's up there saying, hey, I've got it covered. It's like, it may seem like a difficult thing to you, but I have it covered. Later on, God will talk about Himself as taking His people and covering them the way a hen covers its chicks. In fact, there's something that the Lord Jesus, and I believe that this is the Lord Jesus all the way through. When the Lord was coming down to Jerusalem, on the day of the triumphal entries, He was coming down, and He looked at the city, and said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen does gather its young, but you would not." And then He predicted the downfall of the city and the temple. The next thing that ought to be pointed out is He says to them, if you will keep my commandments, and if you'll keep my covenant, then you'll be a special people to me above everybody else. And the Jewish nation has for years taken that whole idea that they were chosen. And you've probably heard of the expression, God's chosen people. You've heard that with reference to the Jewish nation. They're God's chosen people. And many of them firmly believe that, unless they're atheists and then they don't believe anything. Of course, there have been lots of jokes. I've heard that either Presbyterians or Episcopalians, sometimes they refer to themselves as God's frozen people. But that's, we like to make light of these kind of things. But they take the idea of chosen. And we know that God has made a choice. And in fact, later on in the New Testament, we see this choice that God makes, and we're included in that. But you notice that He did not say, I brought you up with eagle's wings and took care of you, and you are a chosen people to me, above a treasure above everybody else on the earth. That's what it says, except He doesn't say you are. He says if, then. And when you have an if, then, it means there are certain conditions you need to abide by. And the idea was this: obey my words and keep my covenant. And what happened? Did they keep His words? No. Did they keep His covenant? No. And so you have people who don't do the thing, and they want something. I'll tell you what. It reminds me of all kinds of young people that I have to work with from time to time, and they're given assignments, and they don't do them. But they still want a good grade for the course, and the teacher's like, but you didn't do it. Yeah, but I could have done it. I would have done it, I just didn't do it. When I was a kid, the dog ate my homework thing, people used to do that. I literally once saw a dog eat a kid's homework. I literally saw that happen once. She lived right over here on Hillview Lane. I was teaching her house, and I'm looking down, and I said, your dog is eating your homework. However, However, today a lot of kids have worse things than that. The chaos in their family is such it's amazing to get anything done. But that's another point. But people failed to meet the criteria, and yet still expect to be treated. And they want to be treated as though they're special, and then they complain against God when throughout all history they've been treated as anything but special. But the issue is not so much of the racial heritage, but it really falls along the line. When you look at what the New Testament teaches, it really falls along the line. Is if somebody has a covenant relationship with God, which a believer does, and keeps his word, follows what he teaches, then we're a special treasure. And God considers us as a special treasure to him. He loves to see people who are trusting in him and believing him and following him. The Apostle John mentioned this. He said, I have no greater joy than to see your children walking in truth. You know, in today's world, people are more concerned about how much money, how much fame, or whatever else kids acquire, and much less concerned whether they're walking in truth, and that should be your deepest desire. Now, Moses goes and tells the people all these things. And they listen, and they said, everything God says, we'll do. You know? It's amazing how easy it is for people to make promises. They get up there, they recognize, first of all, you know, you have to think about it this way. They're out there in the wilderness. If God were to abandon them at this point, their lives would be done. So, when you have your backs to the wall, or actually up against the mountain, so to speak, it's easy to say, yep, we'll do it. We promise. We promise. It's kind of like, you know, on the southern border, we have all these people that come across, and they said, okay, so you need to show up at court on this day to have a hearing. Okay, we'll do that. And then nobody ever shows. It's very easy to make promises. And people make promises to God all the time. People have told God, if you get me out of this jam, then I will do this. And they get out of the jam, and then they forget all about it, and they don't do anything what they promised God they would do. This is what happened in the nation of Israel. He said, I want you to be a nation of priests. Well, what in the world does that mean? Does it mean that everybody there had the job like Aaron had? No. We're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. What is the function of a priest? The function of a priest is to come and take the concerns of the people and their failures and everything else and to represent them to God and to pray for them. And he wants a nation of people who will look at the world, look at their neighbor, look at themselves, look at their family, look at the world, and pray and intercede to God on behalf of that world. We ought to be doing that. That hasn't happened for the most part throughout history. Now we read this, and I think it's kind of cute. Moses goes back to God. He says, this is what the people said. Do you think Moses had to go back to God to tell him what the people said? I think that God pretty much knew it. But on the other hand, it's important to have this interchange where Moses, as the official representative of God to the people, also becomes the official representative of the people to God. And he said, well, this is what they said. They're good to go. And when Moses reported that they're willing, they said they're willing to obey everything you tell them. Well, God tells Moses, okay, then I'm going to come down and meet. And notice what he said. He comes down to the mountain, and you'll find that the mountain just smokes with fire. It becomes the place where God's presence is very much known. And he tells Moses, I'm going to speak to you so that they can hear, that they will fear and they will trust you forever. So when God spoke to Moses, it says that the people could hear it. In fact, when we get to the next chapter, chapter 20, in the giving of the Ten Commandments, it is not totally clear, but it may be that when God spoke the Ten Commandments, and it does say he spoke all these words, that the people literally heard God himself speaking the Ten Commandments. Most of us think of the Ten Commandments as chiseled on stone. That came later. And people heard, and we haven't gotten to this, I will next time around. People heard God's voice and they said, we can't take this. Moses, let God talk to you, and you tell us what he said, because we can't handle it. But now we have this other thing, rather an interesting statement. He said, I don't want anybody to go near that mountain. If they do, put them to death, whether it's man or animal. Well, first of all, I'm just letting you know how I am. If I saw a mountain burning with fire for 40 days, what they have going in California is nothing by comparison, I wouldn't get near it. But apparently there's always somebody who's really curious and thinks they're really brave, and they're going to go up there. And the picture is this: we have no right to enter God's presence unless we are invited. Moses was invited up. Joshua, Aaron were invited up that mountain at different times, but Moses alone was invited up twice. Anybody else was to be put to death, and they said this: we don't want you to do it a death by, contact. It's either by stoning, which was a preferred method of execution back then. That way, everybody could say, well, I don't think it was my stone that actually killed him. It was probably somebody else's stone that actually did the thing. And then, that's like today, not today, but in past generations, when you'd have a firing squad of 7 people and one person wouldn't have a bullet, so you could always console yourself that you're the one that had the blank. The whole idea, the community had to bring the judgment, no one person had to feel. But on the other hand, what if they're too far up there for you to be able to throw a stone? You may not have the throwing arm of a Major League Baseball player. What are you going to do? Well, now we use the arrow, and now you have archers, and I doubt that it would just be one archer, probably multiple archers. So that person, now, in the narrative, God tells them what they're to do. At no point do we see that anybody had to be executed. And I doubt anybody would, because I think most people would be like me, I'm not getting near that place. But the picture that God is showing is, we don't just saunter into his presence uninvited. And when we go forward to the New Testament, and we look at the ministry of Jesus Christ, where he says in the book of Hebrews, we have a high priest. He said we don't have a high priest that can't be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, meaning we have one that can be. He said, but we now have boldness to go before the throne of grace, asking for mercy and grace in time of help in time of need. So we have been invited to go into God's presence and make our requests. And we don't live in the kind of generation that other people did for most of human history, where you would have a king and you wouldn't dare set foot into that throne room unless you'd been invited. And when you did, you would better bring an offering, and when you came in, you would better kneel down. And if the guy didn't hand a scepter or make some kind of motion for you to stand up, you were in deep trouble. Just look at the book of Esther sometime. But we now have this picture where the people have said, we will do everything. And because they promised to do everything, God says, okay, now I will tell you everything. And it's kind of an interesting situation, Because we live in a world where people would tend to say, well, first tell us what you want us to do, then we'll think about it. You know? Tell us first and let us think about it. And he says, no, you decide first whether you're going to follow, then I'll tell you. And of course, once he gave the commandments, and then a long list of other laws, I'm sure people looked at those laws and said, oh my goodness, I don't like this law. There are a lot of laws back that were given at the time of Moses that made the things that what the patriarchs did illegal, worthy of punishment. They had to restructure their whole society because of God's rules. But God had said, you need to make that promise first, then I'll tell you. And I want you to think about this. God invites us to come. We're told that we should receive him as our Lord and Savior. He doesn't say to us, I'm going to give you a list of all my promises, a list of all my demands, and then you decide if you like it, we're going to have a contract on this. He wants us to sign up and basically say, I belong to you. You're now in charge of me. Now, by an interesting coincidence, Sage is here today. Sage looks like he's his own guy, but actually he's a property of the United States Navy. And he's very much aware that even though he's in Pittsburgh right now, well, he doesn't be living right now, he's obviously here in a second, but he can get a command that says, leave there now and go there. And what do you have to do? Leave and go, right? They can say whatever they want to tell him, this is your job, he's got to take it. And I think about this with the Apostle Paul, or the Apostle Peter, any of those. Once God had chosen them, he told them, oh, by the way, this is what you're going to be doing. With the Apostle Paul, he said, I need to show him what great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And it's like, wow, that's my job description? To suffer? It is for some people. Because God does something through sufferings. He works amazing things through sufferings. Some people's sufferings have brought others to Christ. I'm going to be down in Raleigh next week, and one of the things I want to share with people, I've got 5 minutes to talk, is when I did a funeral for 2 little girls who had lived a total of, they were twins, lived maybe 2 or 3 days and passed away. Those parents suffered greatly. But because of their short life, and I'll also say this because I obeyed God and said the things at the funeral that needed to be said, those parents became believers. Through suffering, people can come to know Christ. It is the suffering, they said, that the blood of the church, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. When people witness others suffering and see how they get through that suffering with God's grace, they want in on it. But suffering also affects our lives. The Apostle Peter says, he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from his sin. It's like, okay, we've learned something about it, but most importantly, it is the sufferings of Jesus Christ by which we are saved. And it's important that we recognize that. Some people are called to suffer, but Jesus Christ himself was sent to this earth to suffer for us. And so, why should it seem like a strange thing that God would say to any of the rest of us, you're going to have to go through some things, when he made his own son suffer the cross? One of the things we ought to be is people who say, everything that God says, we will do. Everything God says, we will do. Because he's God and he loves us and he knows what's best. But we also know this. And we're told that he who lives godly will suffer in this life. So Lord, if it happens, it happens. But in following him, we have his as our example. And we need to be so grateful and thankful that Jesus suffered for us, and we get on a regular basis to take the Lord's table, we take the bread, and we take the cup, which are symbols of him, but they're obvious symbols of his sacrifice for us. And so as we take this today, one of the things that I would just encourage you to do is when you take it, say to the Lord in the privacy of your heart, Lord, everything you say, I'll do. I'll receive from you what you have for me. Let's pray.